thanks so much to everyone for coming. It's really, really good to see so many people here. My name is Matthew and I work for Unlock Democracy, and I'm lucky enough to be facilitating this really, really exciting talk that we're all going to take part in. We have with us today Danny Paffard of Green New Deal UK, and I'm going to be handing over to Danny in just a very short while. As I said, it's wonderful to see so many of you here, and if you haven't already, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know why you decided to join this on at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, and let us know where you're based as well. It's always exciting to see. So if you're new to Unlock Democracy, as many of you might be, we're facilitating these various discussions. We've had one each day this week. We're facilitating them because we think the root of the many crises that we're facing is that power is too concentrated in our society, and it's concentrated among a small group of people, and that the solution to this is to campaign for a better democracy where there is a deliberative process to design a new set of institutions, a new set of rules that are protected by a new constitution. Just before I continue, there are a few housekeeping things to run through. This session is being recorded, so just bear that in mind. We are going to be having a question and answer session in the middle of this talk. So if you have questions for our speaker, Danny, then please do put them in the chat. My colleague Sam is here. He's going to be monitoring the chat, and he's going to be collecting some of those questions as well. This is a conversation, so please keep it civil and respectful. And please do, I think we've muted your mics, but please do keep them muted to ensure that everyone has the best experience on the call, because it gets quite hard to take part if you can hear too many people speaking at once. So this is going to work. We're going to hand over to Danny very soon. Danny is going to speak to us a bit, tell us about her work and why you've invited her to speak. Please do submit your questions in the chat box while she's speaking, and then we'll have a short Q&A at 6:30. And then at around 10 to 7, we're going to separate out into smaller groups. This is the really exciting bit where we'll get to discuss what Danny's just told us and contribute our own thoughts as well. And then towards the end, we'll all be coming back together as a group and feeding our ideas back and having hopefully a really lively and vibrant discussion following that. So just before we hand over to Danny, I just wanted to explain a bit about why we've convened this discussion and why we think it's so important. Now, obviously, we're in the midst of a massive crisis and a number of different crises that are all that we're facing together as a society. We're facing a growing divide in our society in terms of income and wealth. We're watching our social safety net dissolve alongside a hostile environment that so many migrants are facing. A lack of action on climate change is another one of these, and perhaps one of the most substantial. And we wanted to convene this discussion because there's a huge divide between the mass public support that we see for action on the climate and the total lack of action from our government. The net zero target that we currently have officially in this country, the target to reach net zero in carbon emissions by 2050 is way too slow, and too little has been set out to explain how we're actually going to get there. According to polling undertaken by YouGov for the group NEON, 60% of people think, and this is last month, 60% of people think that the government is not prepared to take climate change on and really address it substantially. This is potentially part of the reason why we've seen young people and various movements like XR take such drastic direct action over the past year, because they recognise that the formal political system isn't responding to their needs. We also see that those who have a lot to gain from inaction on climate change currently hold all the power. Fossil fuel companies have made substantial donations to governing parties, including the Conservative Party in the UK, and particularly fracking companies and companies aligned with them. And that's what we need to remember when we remember that the UK government was so willing to impose fracking on a country which so obviously didn't want fracking to take place. And this begins to show how our undemocratic political system favours the voices of a small few, a small wealthy few, and elevates those above our voices. And so it's this disjunct, I guess, between what the people want to see on climate change and what is actually happening at the formal political level, that leads us to the rough conclusion that the climate crisis is at root a democratic crisis as well, and that in order to address the climate crisis, we need to address the democratic deficit in the British state, and build something altogether better and more democratic for everyone. And so before we hand over to Danny, one thing, like an exercise that we like to do here, we wanted to see what you think. So we're going to ask you a question, and then a poll is going to magically appear on your screen. So what we wanted to ask is, do you think that the economic recovery programs that we're going to see following or during the COVID-19 crisis are going to take into account the need to rapidly decarbonize our society? You've got about, maybe we'll give you 10 or 15 seconds, but it's a short question. Go for it. We'll collect a few more votes, and then we'll close the poll. Just a few more people haven't decided. We're almost there. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. And as you can see, a full 2/3 of you think that the answer is a clear no. Then we've got some people who are wavering, they're unsure whether this is going to be the start of a rapid decarbonisation programme, and maybe 10% in a clear minority who think that those programs will see that. So this is the context that we're all in. This is where we're all approaching this question from. If you have any more thoughts on that, please do say in the chat why it is you voted the way you did. Of course, being civil and respectful. And yeah, please do keep feeding your answers through. So without any further ado, thanks so much for indulging us in that little exercise. I'm going to pass over to Danny, who's going to share her own slides. So I'm going to stop sharing mine for a second.
Hi, everyone. Ooh, hang on a second. Something has happened. Okay, great. The panic on your face, Matthew. Hi, everyone. My name's Danny. I am the head of organising for Green New Deal UK. And yeah, I've got 20 minutes to talk to you about how we win a Green New Deal post-lockdown. And so what I'm going to do is to kind of introduce the Green New Deal a bit, kind of give a bit of backstory as to kind of where it came from, what it is, talk a bit about the Green New Deal UK organising strategy and what it is and how we think we're going to win. And then talk about kind of Build Back Better, which is the kind of campaign response we've launched to like this specific moment and like what that means, and yeah, how people can get involved. So that is it. I've got some slides as well I'm going to run you through. And this starts with this like beautiful picture of the youth strikers charging through the streets of London demanding a Green New Deal, because it's one of their like top asks, which is wicked. So what is the Green New Deal? So basically it is a ambitious 10-year national action plan to transform our economy, secure a livable climate and build a more just society. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there is not one Green New Deal here. There is many possible iterations of this, and different campaign groups will have different takes on it. The government will have its own take on like what it means to deliver a Green New Deal. But basically it's a full-scale economic transformation of society and the economy to meet the double crisis of inequality and climate. I'm not going to dwell on the context, because we're all here because we know there is a climate crisis, there is a crisis of inequality, and they are inextricably linked. And until we deal with them together, we're not going to win. So I'm just going to whiz through these slides. They'll be sent to you afterwards, but it's just to break up the Zoom kind of days, isn't it? So a bit of history on the Green New Deal. So this idea comes from Roosevelt's New Deal, which was kind of 1930s America in response to the kind of rebuilding the economy after the Great Depression, and it was a series of kind of works programs and regulations and I guess kind of mass transformations to transform the economy. And I think one of the key things that happened in that's like less kind of associated with it was the first thing that Roosevelt did was take away the power of the banks and kind of renationalize the supplies of gold or whatever, and that was a really important part of that New Deal. So fast forward, and we've got the 2008 financial crisis, and in response to and looking down the barrel of kind of austerity, the Green New Deal group, which was a bunch of kind of left-wing academics, kind of proposed the Green New Deal as the alternative to austerity, and a kind of way that we could kind of reboot the economy in that moment to meet the needs of people and planet. But we all know what actually happened. So this is the kind of genesis of this idea. And speaking to those kind of academics now, their analysis is that this idea didn't catch on because there wasn't a social movement behind it. The ideas were great, but actually until people are like demanding it and calling for it, we're not going to win. And so fast forward to 2018, and Ann Pettifor happens to be speaking to AOC, the like very charismatic youngest senator in America, to her campaign team, thinking about, okay, what's the platform we run on? Suggests the Green New Deal. It's a hit, and we've seen a huge, the like kind of campaigning around the Green New Deal in the States kind of really hit this real peak, and was this amazing, I guess the perfect kind of parallel of like having champions both in the political system, but this extremely powerful and compelling grassroots movement, which was the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth-led grassroots movement that was calling for it. And so that's been a really powerful thing to watch. And then so we, a kind of Green New Deal UK, decided that it was about time that we did more campaigning on this in the UK. And so, Green New Deal UK was set up. I know that was too soon. What we did, so we see, lots of the spaces we entered to talking about Green New Deal were about policy. And it's like, everyone wants to talk about policy because it's sexy, it's cool, it's like the details, the nitty gritty, and that's great. But at Green New Deal UK, we think we're really like the organizing hub behind some of these ideas and how to like get this to catch on, get this to move. But what we did do is developed a set of principles that we think are kind of the key like underlying features of a Green New Deal and what it has to be. And that includes, totally decarbonizing, creating millions of jobs, transforming the economy so the financial system serves people and planet, protects and restores vital habitats, and promotes global justice. And so within these kind of broad set of principles, that's what a Green New Deal means to us. And then we're like handing over to working in partnership with New Economics Foundation and other kind of think tanks to really develop up these ideas into policies, working with frontline groups. Then COVID happened, so that hasn't happened yet, but that's where we're at. And our so our like organizing strategy is about building a kind of broad-based and powerful social movement that can build the like social and political conditions that mean this Green New Deal is going to happen, and obviously see a government committed to delivering it. So how we are, I'm probably going to like whiz through these slides because we don't have much time, and this is the real nitty-gritty of the strategy that you don't necessarily need to hear. But basically, it's about building a really powerful movement that is a kind of alignment of pillars in society, which include like the organized youth, which we've seen like the kind of the youth strikers getting out on the streets and their kind of righteous anger, and they're super powerful. Organized workers and the trade unions, and that incredible power in society, despite the kind of decades of kind of stamping on by successive governments, and organised communities and kind of people organising locally where they are have been like, you know, was really lucky to be involved in the anti-fracking movement a few years back that just was incredibly powerful. So our like theory of change is around having both people power and political power, and like needing to build both. And how we think we're going to do that is about kind of developing really powerful local organising, and we're calling them hubs, local Green New Deal hubs. They're not groups because they're kind of like networks of campaigns, but yeah, so we felt like a hub was a better analysis, and then kind of punctuating that with like high profile mobilisation so that the message gets out, having mechanisms to build that pressure in Parliament, and then telling really powerful stories about like what a Green New Deal is, what it means locally, and how we're going to get there. Cool. And this is, yeah, just a bit more about like the, you know, the local hubs and campaigning and how we see that being a really important thing. That's like technical detail that you probably don't need. But ultimately these groups are about like local organising needs to be about building the movement, turning that into political pressure, and like embodying the change that we want to see. That's some of the support that we offer to groups to do that. You don't need to see that, and the process that you can go through to set it up. So that was our like analysis and strategy, and it was really based on like local organising and kind of strategic allies and how to build power and support locally for like big transformational ideas. And so first of all, the Tories won the election, and that was an interesting, we as an organisation only started in November, so that was a fairly early kind of strategic pivot for us. And then obviously coronavirus happened and created this kind of big tear, even wider tear in the kind of fabric of society, and like really just kind of shifted the realms of what was possible, both for like communities, for government, for our imaginations, for our like fears, for our and created this moment. And so a bunch of us from like from Green New Deal UK and from other organisations kind of came together to launch the Build Back Better campaign as a response to this moment, which like was intended to really speak to people's like immediate needs and make sure that we campaign to make sure that people's immediate needs in this moment were met, but that we were also talking about that, you know, not going back, and that this was actually a moment to like build back better to what we wanted, and a real like pivot moment where we could you know, rebuild society in a way that we wanted. And so the Build Back Better campaign has kind of soft launched a few weeks ago on International Nurses Day, and we worked with a bunch of nurses to talk about what building back better meant for them. And it was, you know, it was PPE, and then it was like, actually, you know, it's a pay rise, it's stopping racial discrimination, it's funding bursaries. Like, what does it mean to like properly support our like our frontline workers who have been the heroes in this situation? So I'm not sure what we've got. Oh, I've got loads of time actually. So we pulled together a bunch of organisations to start thinking about the Build Back Better campaign, and developed a kind of series of principles around meeting people's immediate needs now and into the future, properly investing in public services, a transformative Green New Deal to like decarbonise our economy, investing in people, not businesses, not big business, and being globally just. And the idea is like along very similar lines. It's around like building public support and then translating that to political pressure in the moment to ensure that the recovery plan that we get does build back better. And I guess I'll go to the next slide. You can tell at this point this is a new campaign, and the designer hasn't had a go at making them beautiful for me. So this is just my own PowerPoint skills, which you can see are quite bad. But so this is the Build Back Better campaign. That's the website, and we're hoping next week to kind of launch with a big kind of organizational sign-on and a bunch of frontline workers talking about what it means to build back better for them. So like nurses, healthcare workers, teachers, shelf stackers, carers, bus drivers, everyone talking about what it means to kind of, to build back better. And then the kind of ongoing campaigning around this is we're again looking at like local organizing and encouraging communities to like build kind of power and awareness locally. And there'll be like a local organizing guide, and we're encouraging people to start hosting kind of community meetings online to start having these conversations across their communities. And our like organizing strategy again has kind of three main planks, and the first one is kind of like building awareness and like conversations across the community across a really diverse range of actors. So like, what are the firemen saying to the posties, saying to the nurses, saying to the activists, like what's their like shared vision? And so the first plank is about building community awareness and like doing community visioning and getting the kind of build back better kind of idea and metaphors out there. And we'll be producing lots of like videos that kind of explain that metaphor and kind of content. The second is like turning this into political pressure. And we think the most powerful way to do that is looking at, so there'll be a kind of individual email your MP tool, fine. But looking at building community support for those sign-on letters. So, I live in the Calder Valley, and we'll be working with, lots of the groups around here to kind of co-sign a letter going to the local MP to put pressure on them on like that. And we'll be kind of coordinating that across the country, across the UK. And the final thing is kind of raising awareness, building support, and these kind of mobilization moments, and how we can like act together in the same moment to like tell elements of the Build Back Better story and raise the profile. And so the first one we're looking to do is June 24th, and like that's when the Committee on Climate Change is going to release its, 25th is when the Committee on Climate Change is coming with its next report about, normally they report every year on like how the government is doing on its climate targets, not very well. And but this year they're doing a special kind of like green recovery thing. But we don't know exactly what it's going to say, but obviously they're still working to a 2050 target. And we think it's really important to mobilize in that moment and say like 2050 is not good enough, and like this is the pivot moment. So we're hoping that the youth strikers can really lead the charge on this, and lots of other people and yourselves will kind of join in with that. And the next moment is it's the NHS's birthday, or like the anniversary of the founding of the NHS on Sunday, July the 5th. Sorry. And we think it's really important that we use that moment to tell the story about the founding of the NHS, and how that it was people powered that delivered that, and the importance of a public health system that like works for everyone and that needs to be properly funded, and its work is properly valued. So we're looking to think about how we can elevate that moment. Obviously the government will have lots of things to say about the NHS birthday as well, and how great, so how do we kind of like push back, how do we not let it be a health wash moment, as my kind of medical kind of fighting comrades say. And we're looking at like family friendly things like baking a cake with like political messaging, through to, okay, let's do a cake protest outside the MP's office and like, flood it with cakes, things like that. And as we kind of move forward, we'll be thinking of other kind of mobilizations that speak to other elements of the kind of Build Back Better plan. So that's the plan. And that's nearly my time. So I'll probably leave it there, if that's all right.
Thanks very much, Danny. That was wonderful, and we've had loads of fantastic questions coming in. We've got a good few minutes, so we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. But thanks so much, everyone. And if you do have any more, please do keep sending those through. But I'm going to make use of my power as the host of this call, and pose my own question first. You mentioned quite a bit, Danny, that the Conservatives winning a massive majority in December changed your strategic outlook quite a lot, and this is something that kept cropping up in the chat as well. Lots of people very despondent about the fact that the party of government for the next 4 or 5 years at least, it seems, completely opposes this kind of drastic action, and it's completely in their interests to keep doing that. And so with that in mind, where do you see the power lying, and how can we use that power to resist them?
Yeah, I mean, the inevitable question. I actually think that we felt, I think we're less like wrong-footed by it than like lots of organizations who do more traditional like kind of advocacy and kind of like going and like talking direct to decision makers, because I think actually the like theory of change around mobilizing communities and like putting on community pressure is still like actually the only way that kind of MPs will be influenced and change will be made. And so like I think the theory of change that holds that like if you build enough kind of community pressure around something, then MPs will have to respond. Like obviously I think we've seen, like we do not expect the full Green New Deal to be implemented by a Conservative government, but there are key planks of it that we think can be. And like the pivot in our strategy was much more around, it went from being much more based on like high profile mobilizations and kind of like building the like hype, to much more local organizing and like building a local base and like encouraging people to like build that power in their communities. And our next step was to kind of put resource into those places which we think are strategically significant. And there's lots of all those red wall seats that have fallen, like actually like the green, we know that the Green New Deal policies were actually popular, and so it's just kind of like building public support, I guess kind of in the lead up. And we had the experience of, I certainly had the experience of door knocking and talking about the Green New Deal at the time, and kind of met with blank faces, and it's like, that's completely wrong. Like I shouldn't be selling the Green New Deal to people here. Like this should be, we need to build the kind of public appetite for this, because it's in people's best interests, or lots of people's interests. So yeah, I think like recognizing that it's much harder and it can't be delivered in full, but that there are some wins to be had, and that I believe that local organizing is still the like effective way to do it.
Awesome, thank you. The next question, it's a bit of it's quite a different one, but I was intrigued by it. Pad, early on in your talk, Paddy commented in the chat, pointing out that the fact that we as the UK are leaving the EU, and that our current government is looking to strike up this really close trading relationship with the United States. When that takes place, if and when that takes place, it could be that environmental policy swings much closer to the policy of Donald Trump than the policy of Green New Deal UK. So I suppose the question is, how threatening actually is this kind of trade deal, and how important do you think it is to resist these kind of secretive trade deals?
I mean, it's all just a nightmare, isn't it? But I think, and yes, I think they present a like really very serious threat and challenge, and they're like hard to campaign on, and it's really difficult. I think my like answer is always the same, and it's just like organize, unless we like organize against this and create a really compelling vision of like actually what we do want, we won't be able to effectively resist it. And I think actually we've got some really good examples here of like fighting trade deals that haven't gone through because people have kind of mobilized against them. So I think yes, it's really difficult and really kind of shit and dangerous, but yeah, we do, like, it's just the next thing to campaign on, isn't it?
Organize is always the answer. always the answer to every question.
Yeah, if you want more exciting answers, I'm not the right guest.
It's always true in my opinion. But okay, so I suppose connected to that, we've just had a great question from Eddie. Eddie is asking where international solidarity figures in the plans that G&D UK has, because often, you know, Indigenous communities are at the, you know, at the sort of, like, I don't know, the crunch point of exploitation, and that's just as true of fossil fuel extraction, I suppose. So how does that figure in your strategic plans?
Yeah, really good question. And I guess we haven't like worked out the full answer to it yet. There was going to be a kind of big global Green New Deal kind of conference happening around now that obviously didn't happen. And we're looking at, like, you know, building those international connections through COP, and like we're involved in kind of the mobilization plans for the COP in Glasgow. So our current plans are based around, as we like work up the demands process a bit more, thinking about making sure that the people that we involve or like we work with NEF to involve in those processes are like representative of those communities. And I think there's a lot we can do in terms of storytelling and like successes, and like lifting up those voices that that kind of bring the campaign to life. And yeah, I think one of the, I guess, so when we kind of started like the Green New Deal hub in London, one of their like main focuses was like reaching out to diaspora communities and thinking about what the, like, how to build like strategic partnerships and kind of alliances with key groups, kind of locally and nationally. So yeah, like work in progress. I think we have a few ideas, but always welcome more. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question I'm going to throw your way is from Nikki, and I think it's a really good one, particularly in this climate, and I'm sure one that you've been addressing a lot. So Nikki is interested to hear how we are all going to cope with the government using COVID-19 and social distancing to sort of quash gatherings, you know, to change what protest and what resistance actually looks like, and how we all as campaigners can sort of resist that in the best way possible.
It's so tough, isn't it? It's put us in a really difficult situation, and like, because you don't want to break, you know, because we can't be the people that are breaking social distancing rules and putting people in danger. And obviously that is going to shift over time to the, like, you know, as the like question asker pointed out, to just being like repressive policies. And I think it is about thinking of like innovative ways that we can resist, and you know, whether that's like digitally or in our communities. And I think there are lots of creative ways that we can do that. I think we're also really lucky that we do have a very active kind of social movement space. Like Extinction Rebellion have done an amazing job of like pushing the envelope and just like not backing down. And you know, and actually we've seen protests under much more repressive conditions kind of, you know, get up and fight and win. So I think we can, I think there are creative things that we can do, and I also think we can push back, and that we're in a relatively good place to do so, having quite, you know, a strong judiciary and like active social movements. But it's a pain in the ass. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, definitely. So then the next question is another like really insightful one, again from Paddy. So thanks, Paddy. Yeah, Paddy notes that COP has been rescheduled. It's been pushed back quite a few months, and COP has in the past been a real sort of focal point for climate activism. So I guess what I want to ask is whether you see that primarily as a as a problem for Green New Deal campaigns and for climate campaigners, or whether it's actually an opportunity to refocus climate campaigns.
Yeah, I think it's a shame in that, like, it's a year lost in a time when we don't really have time to lose. But actually, I think my sense, maybe just because I'm just trapped in a kind of campaignery bubble of like optimism, but it feels like the ground is shifting so much, and what is possible is shifting, and I think it really depends on a kind of like national, international level. And I think kind of internationally, it's probably like, you know, we've lost that time, we've lost that momentum. It's really difficult, and like, you know, particularly for like global south or most impacted countries, it's like a real disaster. I think weirdly in the UK, for like movement mobilizing, it's kind of given people, you know, we felt we had loads of time, and then it was getting closer and we were kind of panicking because we weren't organized, because that's always how organizing works. And so now we feel like we've got this, you know, this extra time to kind of build bigger and make it more powerful and make it stronger. And kind of, you know, whether that manifests or not, we'll see. But I think it is an opportunity to take a bit more time now that the infrastructure is set up. Like the big kind of civil society coalitions that are mobilizing around it have been established now and have got, you know, got stuff in place. So I actually think from a kind of UK perspective in terms of mobilizing and what that means for putting pressure on our government and like engaging kind of communities in it, I think that side is positive, if there's a positive to take from it, that we'll be able to like push back harder. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So I guess pivoting back a bit to look at the Green New Deal, Andy has commented that a lot of the time, when programs like the Green New Deal, because they have such a sort of macroscopic approach to the change we need, and because they are an entire program, that they often sort of get described as being sort of high cost or high risk, and this is often a rhetorical device that you see Conservatives using in respect of, you know, lots of different transformational programs. So how do you think we can sort of start to work to shift that view, and I suppose, yeah, persuade a majority of people that that's just not true and that this is possible?
Organize. I think, yeah, I mean, there's like, obviously there's organizing, and then there's a communications challenge about picking the right stories and metaphors. And we know that and the right frames. And obviously we know the kind of, you know, the dangerous frame that we're going to be playing against is the one that was used to implement austerity, and the kind of thinking of the household, the national budget as a kind of household purse. And that was just so good, and that, you know, money had all been spent, there wasn't any left, and it was just a really kind of emotive kind of metaphor that really, well, that meant that austerity won. And so I think thinking about the frames that we use to talk about what's possible, I think we're also in a much better place than we were. You know, the Conservative government just did things that would seem impossible several months ago. They just paid a quarter of the country to be paid to work, or most of their salary, and not go to work. And, you know, they nationalized bits of the rail service, and they did all sorts of things that you know, there's clearly a magic money tree has appeared, and you know, when in a time of crisis, money can be spent. And I think that's actually that's probably the most useful thing in terms of shifting the perception on what's possible. Yeah.
Great. The next question is from Sam. Sam is asking, after furlough and the hang on, I mean, you sort of, I'm not going to ask that because you've basically just covered it. I love it when that happens. I'll move to Callie's question. Callie wants to know a bit more about how you're going to work with organisations that are already working, charities. Extinction Rebellion is mentioned to sort of strengthen and make the movement broader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the moment, with Build Back Better, we have a kind of, so we've just set up a steering group of organisations that include kind of MedAct health campaigners, Docs Not Cops, New Economics Foundation, Unison, PCS, Greener Jobs Alliance, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, who else? And then Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, 350, Workforce, who are a really cool new kind of like workers' rights movement. So we've kind of baked those guys into the steering group to make sure that, and the youth strikers, of course. And so we've kind of baked that into like the structure of it, so they're kind of like have strategic oversight of big decisions to make sure that key constituencies that we think are important, which are like health workers, unions and workers, young people in frontline impacted communities, and Big Green, are all kind of sat around the table together. And we think that's the key components in this moment that need to be working together. And then there's a much wider coalition. I think we've got 50 other organisations signed up as of this morning to kind of work together on this. And for me, it's about, this campaign isn't kind of really owned by anyone, or the idea is to be like, this is the framework we're creating. This is the frame of Building Back Better. And then everyone else can kind of do their campaigning kind of under this banner that we all kind of like lift up together. So we'll be working with different organizations in different ways. And so, so the example of like Nurses United, and for the first action was just like working with a group of radical nurses to like say, okay, what do you want to say? And let's kind of get, let's get the Big Green organizations talking about nurses' rights, which is actually harder than it should be. So I think there are some partnerships that will work like that in terms of frontline voices that need to be lifted up. Some partnerships surround the climate stuff. We are talking to, we hope to do that in partnership with Extinction Rebellion as well as others, and actually kind of bring XR in from the cold a bit as the kind of movement outlier. And they're really up for working together on something that seemed to be kind of supporting the rest of the movement. Yeah, so it's really hard to create unity on the left, or like because but we're hoping that by lifting up the voices that we think are important in this moment, like the kind of healthcare workers and stuff like that, people can like align around it, and by picking moments that people can respond to in different ways, and by letting people choose their own kind of theme. So Feedback are thinking about convening lots of kind of food and farmery types to talk about like Build Back Better for food and farming, and like what does that mean, and like what are the key things we want to see, that kind of stuff.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We're going to be moving on to our breakout rooms very shortly, but I just wanted to ask one final question, which is more sort of action focused for the people on this call. So if there's sort of one thing, and I'm sure there's more than one thing, but if there was one thing that all of us should go away and do tomorrow to support this Build Back Better campaign, what do you think that should be?
Ooh, well, I mean, the basic one is sign up to the websites, and then you can find out about all the other things, but that's like one of those trick questions. So actually, I think the most strategically useful thing is going to be the community sign-on tool when that launches, and that should be kind of in the next couple of weeks. So the first thing to do is kind of think about your community and like the political alliances and like kind of potential community alliances within that community, and do a bit of community mapping, like who's there, who can be mobilized, who can we work together with. So that's what we're kind of encouraging all of our kind of folks connected to Green New Deal to do now, if they haven't already done it, to be like mapping their communities and the power that they have. And yeah, that I think is important.
The answer is always organize, organize, organize.
It's always organize.
It is the answer. It's the truth. Wonderful. Thanks so much. That was fantastic. But it is only just beginning, because now we all have the chance to feed our ideas in. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sort of separating the call out into lots of different breakout rooms. So there'll be small groups of you in your own sort of private bubbles, and you'll be able to discuss what Danny was saying, like what you thought was the most sort of striking thing about it. And we'd also like everyone to sort of think about what change in our politics like we'd need to see in order for people power to start winning out against those who have an interest in delaying climate action. So how do we make sure, like what can we start doing to make sure that people power wins out in the end? I think my colleague Sam is going to separate us all into breakout rooms, but before he does that, I just wanted to remind everyone to be civil, be respectful, be as respectful, or if not more respectful than you would have been in real life. And please do also pick a facilitator from your group. So pick someone who is able to make notes and feedback on, or just feedback on what you've been discussing. So Sam is now going to separate everyone into breakout rooms, I believe. Take it away, Sam. You should get a box should pop up asking you to join a breakout group. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the main group. I always enjoy being whisked back from a breakout group. It's quite fun. You feel like you're going through a sort of vortex or something. Wonderful. Right. I think everyone is back in the main group. That was great. I really enjoyed that. And thanks so much to everyone for taking part. What we're now going to do is invite one person from each of the breakout groups to feed back into the main group, so we can hear everyone's thoughts. If any of you, so hopefully you should have chosen a facilitator in your groups, and if you are the facilitator and you'd like to feed back your group's thoughts, please can you use the raise hand function. You should be able to find the raise hand function by going to the participants list, and you should find a button for the participants list at the bottom of your screen. There we are. Okay, yeah, so Paddy's worked it out. Paddy, I'm going to unmute you, and then you can feed back.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I mean, we came up with some key points. The first being that I think these activities just going off all over the place it's one of the fall downs, for example, of the Remain campaign, was that everything was happening all over the place. There was nothing concerted. I think there needs to be a framework. There needs to be a time-bound plan, and there need to be recognizable milestones and objectives that are going to be achieved by points of time. And all these separate strands need to point into that framework and plan. Otherwise, you're so easy to divide and rule and so on, which is what this government's excellent as. So that was our sort of first point. I think it's important to collaborate with other entities like Positive Money and so on, because I think there's strands of the things that are required to happen to the fiscal system and other places that aren't part of a green plan, but they're an enabler for it. Without sorting out the whole issue of the Buchananian system we live under, we're not going to fix the fiscal thing. And if we can't fix the fiscal thing, which is what gives the motivation to continue the aggregation of obscene wealth and so on, we won't fix the climate thing or the green thing. I think that was the key things. And there needs to be a conduit somehow established to the seat of power, to government, that is a a two-way street that is a functional thing. So whether that's via some sort of citizens' assembly or whatever it is, that's essential, because otherwise the voice just goes nowhere, it just peters out into the ether and government ignore it. And finally, I think there needs to be a leadership forum and a figurehead for the overarching thing. Much as, for example, that girl has done with the climate thing, you need some sort of a figurehead. If you can't identify and put in place a figurehead, that again was a problem, for example, for the Remain campaign. They had no figurehead. You have to have a single entity, a single point where all of this comes together, where, the government can respond to something and everything channels towards that thing. That gives you power when you have things coming to a point. Yeah, that was our sort of thinking.
Thanks very much, Paddy. Wonderful. Is there anyone else who was volunteered to feedback from their group? Just use the raise hand function. Hopefully you've managed to find that. Do pop a message in the chat if you can't. Okay, yep, there's one from Gavin. I'll unmute you, Gavin. Oh no, having trouble. Ah, there we are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So with regard to the first one, what struck you most about Danny's talk? Maybe we had two contrasting sort of responses, really. One was, okay, we know a lot of this already, but we still struggle with how to actually strategize the action that we need to take. The other point was that it still felt a bit abstract. And maybe if I can chip in here, that the speed at which the slides were shown made it difficult sometimes to grasp the points that Danny was making. I mean, I wish I had more time to actually study her slides, because I know what she was saying was really important, and I know she commented, but perhaps when you publish this, we can all see this. The other point was making connections we can right across communities, and not just the obvious ones who might be more left-leaning, but those who we might not initially think as being sympathetic to what we're doing. And so that's an important piece of work. It's patient and slow work. The other thing was to have a key aim or a key target. It can feel rather vague sometimes, but for instance, one of them would be the Labour Party, simply because it's the most likely party to get into power, and therefore, rather than disperse all our energies in different directions, we really have a clear and definite go at the Labour Party to robustly engage it, if you like. Cesare from the International Logic Party felt that his new networking platform had a lot to contribute here, because people can engage and discuss and promote the very ideas that we're talking about in a way that educates each other and informs each other's ideas and finds common ground. And this is aided by an algorithm that captures what people really think about and want, and brings to the fore the ideas that future elected politicians can take forward to their governments, if you like. So that International Logic Party, that platform, that networking platform, could be a very useful tool indeed. In terms of what changes to our political system would we need to see to win out against those seeking to delay climate change? Really difficult. I mean, Cesare again, said that the International Logic Party, his platform, could contribute to that. But it's another one would be proportional representation. Clearly, that's a strong beginning towards any fundamental change, but you actually have to win power to bring that about. Also, the abolition of a House of Lords and a more, a representative second chamber. But prior to actually getting to that stage, where do we go? How do we make those changes? and that's very difficult. The only contribution I put in is one that's already been mentioned about positive money. And I think one challenge we're going to hear on the street more than once is, how are you going to pay for all this? And I think we all need to have a basic education. We need to educate ourselves about how money is created, and about how government debt is used. And if we can do that, then we can go a long way towards addressing the answers that, or the challenges that people put to us. And one key thing that we need to mention on that is quantitative easing. The fact that the government created 430 billion pounds worth of digitally created this and gave it to the banks. So it can be done. Why not a QE for a Green New Deal? I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go for, I think we'll go for one more. I can see Chris Greenwood with his hand raised. I'll just try and meet you there.
Thanks, Sam. Can you hear me okay?
That's perfect.
Great, thanks. I think it's all very difficult to summarize this whole thing, but I'll have a go. The United Nations has told us all, wherever we are in the world, we have 10 years to get on a completely new path. We have to have completely transformed economies, completely transformed societies, and it follows from that, whichever, however you look at it, that we can't really achieve those things in this sort of timescale unless either first or in parallel we transform our political systems, because the status quo at the moment, for all the biggest countries in the world, all the most powerful countries in the world, all the OECD countries and so on, is neoliberal capitalism, and that's your lot. And that's the cause of the environmental and climate problems, as well as many, many others. So something big has got to happen. And I'm not sure that I've heard today the size and scale of ideas that are needed. I first got involved in protests and demonstrations over 50 years ago in 1969. So I've been, one way or another, I've been active in campaigning groups on green things, on peace issues, and on a wide variety of justice issues for all that time. I make no claims for that, and I'm not saying that that nothing has happened in that time. Plenty of good things have happened, but not in proportion to the 50 years. And certainly with only 10 years to go and the radical transformations we need, we've all got to up the game quite a lot. So just my last thought is this. If people, if we're faced with people who say, this is too expensive, we can't afford it, the answer to that is, it's much more expensive to not have this sort of change. Much more.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks everyone for feeding back from groups, and also it sounds like it just feeding in your thoughts. Before we finish up, I just wanted to pass back to Danny. Like, we've had some really interesting and like quite unique, I think, reflections on what you said, and I just wonder whether you wanted to come back on some of those points.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've all been like really useful and interesting points. I think I'm particularly I think the like connection between kind of climate action and like the financing and kind of that whole, my background was in kind of campaigning around finance issues, and kind of moved backwards and forwards between kind of environmental campaigning and kind of finance campaigning, did lots of work with positive money because they're really great. And yeah, I think it's really important that we do combine the two. And I think yeah, I guess I was kind of drawn to Green New Deal because it felt like here was an environmental thing, but that was very like front and center. Like, unless you regulate and reform the financial system and the democratic system, you just can't win. And I think that's a really like helpful analysis. I mean, particularly for the climate movement to have, but but yeah, so I totally like agree and support everyone's points that were made on that. I think and around like QE and stuff. I think, yeah, I mean, and otherwise, like, I don't have much to add on kind of like talking about, you know, the difficulty of like kind of strategizing this on a local level. Like, I agree. We've been running some like support and kind of training workshops with the Green New Deal hubs to kind of help people think through, you know, the power mapping tools that you can use to think through who your like allies would be and how you would like shift power locally. And like at the moment, it is a bit vague, and the like more concrete kind of specific policy proposals will be developed as the kind of campaign evolves and the moments kind of present themselves. But we're letting kind of frontline groups kind of I guess like shape what that space says, and doing kind of organizing first and then listening to what the kind of the people that matter are saying, and then lifting up those asks. So it will get more specific, I think. But yeah, that's like, I don't really have much else to say apart from, you know, thank you for listening, and hope it was useful.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. I mean, yeah, thanks everyone for listening and taking part, but thanks especially to Dani for her time. It's been incredibly generous, and we've all learned so much. So thanks so much for being so generous and coming and sharing your thoughts with us. So I think what would make sense now is for us to wind up. I'm just going to share a quick slide with you, and that will show details of how you guys can keep up with us if you want to know more. There we are. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, this talk tonight is part of a much wider series called Our Democracy Gathering, which we've been holding this week. And so we have 2 more sessions in that series. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Nick Dearden, the Director of Global Justice Now, and Ellen Lees, the Campaigns Officer at We Own It, which is a campaign for public ownership in the United Kingdom. And on Friday, we'll be rounding off our Democracy Gathering with a great session featuring Hilary Wainwright, who is one of the editors of Red Pepper magazine, and Christine Berry, formerly of the New Economics Foundation. And that will be a fantastic way to finish off the week. So please do, if you haven't already, sign up for those talks, come along, take part, feature in those discussions. It's going to be fantastic, and we hope that we can see you there. My colleague Sam has already put a link in the chat, but as he said, we'll be sending around a survey at the end of this talk. So please follow the link in the chat, or follow the link after leaving this call. Feedback to us, let us know how you found this, what we can do better, what we did well, what we did not so well. It's really, really important for us to make sure that we keep on improving, and your feedback will help us do that. Finally, the last thing that it remains for me to say is thank you all for coming. And if you've enjoyed this, please do stay in touch with us. You can make sure you get emails from us if you don't already by visiting our website at www.unlockdemocracy.org.uk, or by following us on Facebook or on Twitter using the links which are conveniently on this slide. But that's all from me. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for being part of this fantastic discussion. All right, bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.